This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's access media station, Plains FM, and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
It's time for Emergence News on Plains FM 96.9, citizen-made radio.
Welcome to Emergence News, a program to inform you about the presence of Maitreya the World Teacher and his group of the Masters of Wisdom, as well as their priorities and teachings for the new time coming. We aim on this program to provide factual information about injustices that persist. And remember that phrase, injustices that persist. That's going to be the theme of today's program and the next. We also provide you with inspired thinking from influential people from all fields and the practical solutions that are being implemented by little-known people in villages and cities everywhere. We also feature well-known people and their contribution to the transformation that's needed in the political, economic, and environmental areas of human existence on planet Earth. So, welcome to part one of a two-part series on war, violence and conflict. Pretty topical right now on this planet, so I've got help in the studio. One's injured and one's not. Welcome, Peter.
Hi, Nigel.
You're not carrying too many injuries at the moment?
No, I'm pretty right at the moment.
You're pretty right. Okay, on the topic of war, violence and conflict, what are you going to be looking at?
Well, obviously the answer is sharing has been the main platform, if you like, of Maitreya, sharing and love. And so we've got to overcome these problems of the dark forces and bring light to the situation. As
the old ways deteriorate.
It does, yes. It's sort of the old materialistic sort of things are no longer working, are they?
The systems need an update. Okay, and a man who needs a physical update is John in the studio here. And John, we won't go into the detail of how you've got yourself injured, but the ribs are not too good at the moment.
Well, there was war and violence at my house as I tumbled down the stairs. But I am here today, Nigel. Just like to say, that was a very nice intro you did.
Oh, I haven't finished yet.
It's a very nice intro. It might keep you on, young fella.
Oh, thank you.
But I've dived into the Share International website, which is one of my favourite places to go. And I've kind of come up with a few ideas that I've put under the banner of Maitreya versus the Middle East.
Well, yeah, speaking of the Middle East, the crisis in the Middle East, there's a special statement that's just been published on the Share International website. So, look, I'll read out that special statement and which has just been published and see what you guys think. It reads as follows. The global community realises that the latest horrific development in world events is a major test, a challenge to our humanity, to our ability to rise above sectarianism, to embrace all and, in doing so, to keep our eyes on the prize that is humanity. The world is deeply troubled by the excesses of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has rapidly escalated into ethnic cleansing and genocide. At the same time, humanity is required to choose, certainly not to choose sides, but to choose for justice, for life and brotherhood, forgiveness, and the relinquishing of any longing for revenge. The current situation must be seen in the context of sustained injustice and oppression of the Palestinian people, decade after decade, since at least the early 20th century. Division and hatred have flourished, fed by propaganda and manipulated by those who stand to profit financially and in terms of power. Nationalism, extremism and fascism, both political and financial, have spawned notions of separation of us versus them. Such attitudes must be abandoned as having no place in a world in which we know ourselves to be one humanity on one planet. Political leaders are conditioned by outdated modes of thinking. Their territorial self-interest and political power games only add to the problems, which they may not be able to contain. All efforts must be made to avoid drawing more countries into this most dangerous situation. That's interesting that Share International have published a statement on this situation, because normally we look at the big picture rather than sort of zero in on particular conflicts such as the Ukraine or, in this case, the Middle East.
I think it's, I'm not surprised too much by it. I think it's very well written for a start. I'm not too surprised about it because this particular topic, the Middle East and Israel-Palestine, Benjamin Creme has talked about at length on many occasions for decades, and he talks about it as a conflict point for humanity, not just for that location. So, and that's how I think I'm hoping to address it, that there is a big picture here that affects us all.
Interesting statement that we shouldn't be choosing sides.
And I think that's a very easy thing to do. It's a very simplistic thing to do. But there is a long history of conflict there and a long history of injustice, which is global. This is not a problem that directly or only relates to the sands of the country that we now call Israel. The decisions around Israel were made in Europe decades ago, and I think that it's very simplistic to see this as a two-sided argument. It's much more complex than that, and many other nations of the world have had a role in it. And one of the things that Creme has commented about is the arms dealers that are selling both sides furious amounts of armaments to continue this this destruction.
And it's the biggest industry on the planet, isn't it?
Biggest industry on the planet. And they're loving it. They're just loving it.
And look, just before we hand over to you, John, I remember on this program we talked, there's several podcasts back, we talked about the John F. Kennedy, the JFK peace speech back in 1963, and just how visionary that was at the time. You know, the guy, we talk about the guy being an initiate.
Yes.
Which means that on the evolutionary path, the guy is perhaps a little bit ahead of the majority of human beings on the planet. Because he talked about the American people need to stop pointing the finger at the Russians and actually examine ourselves and what part we have to play.
So let's remove the word Russians and let's put in the word the other.
Yes.
They need to stop pointing at the other and look at themselves. And of course, America has a big role in this conflict. And Benjamin Creme, if I can get to it in the next two programs, does kind of talk about the role of the USA in global problems. And I guess the other thing I feel is I sit watching TV and I look at Russia and Ukraine and I look at Israel and Palestine, and I just think there is some massive karmic debt being incurred by individuals and peoples around this process that is going to have to play out at some point in the coming times. And if I was able to say to Mr. Putin or Mr. Netanyahu, do you know the cost that you are generating to yourself for incarnations to come?
I suspect they don't have any concept of it.
No, I suspect I'd be wasting my time, but maybe I'd get a first-class flight there and back.
Back with more in just a moment on Emergence News.
Listen, I've dived into the Share International website and in light of this special statement that they put out, that Share International Office put out. And the nice thing they've done, and one of the reasons I love the website, is they've linked a couple of other articles and commentary by Maitreya and Benjamin Creme around this topic together. So literally all I had to do was jump into the website and start pulling stuff out. So I've got some long stuff, I've got some short stuff, and I've tried to kind of get some snapshots so that our listeners can kind of get an overview of, I guess, Maitreya and Benjamin Creme's view on the Middle East. Okay, so I started off with a quote from Benjamin Creme: "Without sharing, there can be no justice. Without justice, there can be no peace. And without peace, there can be no future." The other thing that he's kind of added in there, and I've actually used this with people at work, one of the other ways that he's expanded on that idea is he said sharing leads to trust. Trust leads to justice, and justice leads to peace. And the byline for Maitreya is share and save the world. And that's around resource, but also around love and care. So sharing leads to trust, trust leads to justice, and justice leads to peace. So I've got a couple of things that I put under the banner of Maitreya versus the Middle East. And Benjamin Creme's remarked in a number of his books, in the Share International magazine, where he's addressed this Middle East issue. And his quote is, and I'll probably cover it off a couple of times, is that it will take Maitreya himself to bring about this reconciliation. So Benjamin Creme was asked a question. You have said that one of Maitreya's priorities will be to find solutions to the conflict in the Middle East, and that it will not be solved until he has actually come forward. Is that because the different people involved in the Middle East, Muslims, Jews and Christians, will respond to him as their world teacher and will recognise that he has come for all of them, and that their separation will start to change from that response? It's a very good question, because at the heart of it is, can Maitreya break down separation? Benjamin Creme comes back with, and I see a sense of humour in this. He comes back with, the fundamentalists of all religions will probably be the last people to recognise and respond to Maitreya, but eventually they will. The Palestinian-Israeli problem, which is central to the problems of the Middle East, I believe, will only be solved through the action of Maitreya. But even Maitreya cannot impose a solution. He can only advise.
Yes, he can only suggest, because otherwise he's infringing free will, isn't he?
Absolutely. But his acceptance by countless millions in the world as a spiritual teacher and guide will make it easier for the most fanatical Israeli Jew or Palestinian Muslim to accept the necessity of living together side by side. This can only take place when justice is given to the Palestinians. When justice is done and seen to be done fully and completely, then the solution will become acceptable by the Muslims, and even if grudgingly by the Israelis. They have eventually to learn to live side by side, and they can only do so in a state of justice. Now, everybody on this planet needs to learn to live side by side, all right? So I guess what I like about this is he's looking at the microcosm of Israeli-Palestine, but also saying this is the macrocosm as well. Otherwise, Benjamin Creme goes, there will inevitably be perpetual war between the two. Unless the Middle East problems are solved, there will never be peace in the world. If there is no peace, then the future for humanity would be very bleak indeed. Muslims await the Imam Mahdi, the Jews await the Messiah, and many will recognise Maitreya as such. This will, I am sure, soften their stance in relation to each other. But he comes back again to this point. The most important thing is that justice must be given to the Palestinians. The West Bank was gifted by the late King Hussein of Jordan as a homeland for the Palestinians. And that means the whole West Bank, not the fraction which has been offered to the Palestinians so far. Benjamin Creme goes on to say it requires the return of 4.7 million refugees, mainly in Lebanon, to their homeland, and the status of Jerusalem, which is of a major importance to Muslim Jews and Christians, to be changed into an open central city for all three groups. I believe it will take Maitreya to bring this reconciliation about, and so it will be. And we forget that Jerusalem is the centre of importance for those three religions.
That's right.
It cannot be claimed by one and one only. The other thing that I picked off of the website, and we've talked about this a lot, is the voice of the people. Around the world, Benjamin Creme tells us, more and more people are speaking out, gathering to protest the biased approach to an ancient and highly complex situation. Human rights groups and aid organisations are calling for an immediate ceasefire. But in some of the world's modern democracies, known historically as champions of freedom and equality, public protests are being hampered and even banned at a time when the voice of the people can and must play a crucial role. Huge numbers of ordinary decent people want to see an immediate end to this futile destruction. For the sake of humanity, our future and our planet, stop now. Our collective future depends on our choice. Sharing and justice are the key to resolving this and other conflicts. I've watched this unfold in mainstream media, and what we get is that Hamas slaughtered 1,400 Israelis. There is no mention or update of the numbers involved in this ongoing bombardment of Gaza. So there's this constant bias. We're not getting both sides of the stories, which is not unusual for us to be aware that certain sections of the media will highlight and carry one side of the story.
It's good that you mention the voice of the people, because I immediately think of the voice of the people in South Africa and the fact that miracle happened in the early 1990s when finally apartheid was broken down. And there seemed to be, it didn't seem possible, but as Archbishop Desmond Tutu will say to you, when enough people say we want justice, you cannot stop justice from becoming a reality.
Yeah, I think it's
so. It's possible, even though you can't visualise it. Perhaps.
Yeah.
It is possible.
I was just reading an article today. The head of the Metropolitan Police in London has said that the protests around Palestine and freedom for Palestine will go ahead in London. There's been a big move to stop the protests, and he said, yeah, it's part of who we are. It's a democracy. It will go ahead. So, yeah, the voice of the people is being heard, I suspect, in some quarters. I also picked up, and as I say, a lovely link from that intro that you did, Nigel, to other articles by Maitreya around this topic. One I picked up was Turn the Tide of Hate. Now, this was written by Benjamin Creme's master back in 2001. And there's a little snapshot that I've picked up from it. Call together all parties to the problems which lie behind acts of terror. Abstain from desperate vengeance and open the door to dialogue. Make sincere effort to understand the grievances of countless millions and help transform their lives and minds. No longer can the rich impose their will by wealth and weapons alone. Sharing of resources is inevitable as the only way to justice and peace. Another one I picked up was Aiding the Cause of Peace, once again by Benjamin Creme's master, back in 2003. This is a long time ago.
It was 20 years ago.
The United Nations must bring all possible pressure to bear on the warring parties and aid the cause of peace. The peoples of the world are already on the march. They must raise their voices and demand that peace be theirs. They are the inheritors of the future and must fashion it in peace. Act without fear. Be wise and diligent in your actions, and all will be well. Now, I'm going to expand on this one a bit. It is frequently the case that, remember this is back in 2003, it is frequently the case that in acting for what is seen by them as the good of the world, countries wreak havoc on a world scale. So dense are the fogs of glamour which surround their actions, so illusory is their thinking, that great harm may be done and much pain and suffering caused for the best of reasons. Thus it is today. In recent times, the USA, under the banner of the war against terrorism, has invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, causing thousands of civilian deaths and great physical damage to their infrastructures. The Taliban, fanatical and rigid but in the main uninvolved in terrorism, are dispersed now but are regrouping, training in the skills of terror. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein is no more, but a terrible legacy of deprivation and suffering, lawlessness and chaos has replaced this baleful regime. Now the attention of the US administration is turned to Syria, Iran and North Korea. They are warned to change or face the wrath and might of the upholders of peace and the champions of liberty in the world. Thus does America plunge the world into the atmosphere of stress and fear, and thus do these give fruit to epidemics and natural disasters, which in turn serve to increase the fear and stress. What can be done to stabilise this dangerous situation? How can the nations keep America in check? By what means can ordinary people bring their weight to bear? These are large questions and have indeed no simple answers. They require wisdom of exceptional order and a coordinated approach. So once again, Maitreya and Benjamin Creme's master are going, hold on, this is a macrocosmic problem that we are only looking at the microcosm. And he's naming America as one of the sources of pressure. He finishes up with the United Nations must bring all possible pressure to bear on both America and Israel, standing up to the superpower and aid the cause of peace. The peoples of the world are already on the march. They must raise their voice and demand that peace be theirs. They are the inheritors of their future and must fashion it in peace. So there's some great stuff sitting underneath that initial introduction which you did, Nigel. So Share International website, fabulous stuff if you want a different take on what's going on at the moment.
And of course that superpower America, we really need some sort of adjustment to the Security Council, don't we?
Yes, well, I don't think the United Nations has actually come up with an agreement on peace being called for.
Yeah.
So they're just not in the race at all, are they?
Yeah. So there's some interesting stuff there, and the other thing that I like about this approach is Benjamin Creme and the Master have actually said that this is a rearguard action of the forces of materialism, the forces of evil, and that certain leadership groups around the planet are still in their thrall. And so when we cover this topic next week, I'll pull that stuff out and have a look at that.
Super. And look, we'll continue on this theme of unrest. We need to turn the tide of hate, and we look forward to Peter's contribution in just a moment on Emergence News. Back in a moment.
I'm reading Maitreya's message number 11 from this book by Benjamin Creme. I'm emerging soon. But first I would point the way into the new direction which man, if he would survive, must take. Firstly, men must see themselves as brothers, sons of the one Father. This is essential if they would progress one step nearer the Godhead. Throughout the world there are men, women and little children who have not even the essentials to stay alive. They crowd the cities of many of the poorest countries of the world. This crime fills me with great shame. My brothers, how can you watch these people die before your eyes and call yourselves men? My plan is to save these, my little ones, from certain starvation and needless death. My plan is to show you that the way out of your problems is to listen again to the true voice of God within your hearts, to share the produce of this most bountiful of worlds among your brothers and sisters everywhere. I need your help. I call on you to aid me in this task. How can I stand aside and watch this slaughter? Watch my little ones die. No, my friends, this cannot be. Therefore, I am come quickly among you once more to show you the way, point the path. But the success of my mission depends on you. You must make the choice, whether you share and learn to live peacefully as true men or perish utterly.
All this information can be found on the Share International website, www.share-international.org, and also don't forget the podcasts, which are available on the Plains FM website.
We welcome your comments, questions and feedback. Please contact us at emergencenews@gmail.com.